Hi everyone, and welcome to this TechBBQ session on cybersecurity and why it matters more than you may know. In these times of uncertainty, where remote work has become the new normal, many organizations may be more at risk than ever of cyber attacks. Having strong security systems should be a top priority for any business today, startup or enterprise alike. With us to discuss what you and your business needs to know when it comes to cybersecurity, we have Tom Leighton, CEO of Akamai Technologies, the largest distributed platform operating at the edge of the internet, also specializing in cybersecurity for websites, mobile infrastructure, and API-driven requests. And our second panelist is Mikael, Vingaard, OT security specialist at the Danish Energy Agency, also specializing in high interaction honeypots and how to help defend networks and crucial infrastructure from hackers. Both our panelists have long experience of working with cybersecurity and are here today to share insights and advice with the audience. My name is Emelie Fågelstedt, and I will be moderating this talk. I am one of the co-founders of Svenska Nomader, or Swedish Nomads, which is the largest network for digital nomads and remote workers in Sweden, consisting of over 10,000 individuals. So questions concerning remote work and how to make it safer are, of course, of great interest to me as well. Now, to get this discussion going. As mentioned, remote has become the new normal. But how well prepared are we as a society actually for a world where both employees and consultants working on a team work distributed and remotely? Tom, I'd like you to open on this. What are your thoughts? How well prepared are we for this new normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at the one level of enabling employees to work remotely, we're reasonably well prepared. It is working with the various video technologies and support for remote work. The area where we're not prepared is with security. And at the same time, we're seeing a massive increase in the number of attacks around the world and really across the attack spectrum. Denial of service attacks, much more frequent, much larger. Just in the last few weeks, we're seeing a huge number of DDoS attacks associated with ransom demands against a wide range of companies. We're seeing large increases in the spread of malware. I think the threat actors are aware of the increasing vulnerability when you have a remote workforce that hasn't been adequately locked down, and also the distraction caused by the pandemic, and so that these attacks, can be a lot more effective now. And that explains why we're seeing such a large increase across the board. So a lot of work to do.
Definitely interesting. And what do you think, Michael? What's going on? Are we ready for this? And do we see more cybersecurity attacks today?
I definitely have to echo Tom's remarks. In certain ways, we are very prepared, but in other, we are definitely not that as prepared as one would like to. Also, the new way of working that people are sitting remotely in each different office also suddenly open up for a whole new range of attacks. The attacks in itself is not new, but something like spear phishing and CEO fraud. It's much more easier to be successful in such kind of attacks if your CEO or vice president is sitting in the state next to you or sitting 500 kilometers away from you rather than in the office next door. And as Tom also rightfully said, as some of the systems might not have been dimensioned to like 100% workforce remote, in example like firewalls, VPNs, and similar things, then it's very, the likelihood for a successful DOS attack is, of course, or unfortunately, much higher, as the workload is per default higher than it actually was supposed to be. Very often, people only expect, let's say, 25% of your employees are working from remote, and suddenly you have a 100% work balance.
I see. And I mean, what happens then? Do you think at this point that many companies are at risk if they haven't already started to take any precautions to protect themselves?
Sure, and of course they've tried to take some precautions, but it is really hard. As Michael said, suddenly you have 100% of your workforce is remote, where inherently it's less secure than being in a physical building. I was talking to one CEO of a very large health company, and he was talking about the story he went through. For 2 years, he's been trying to get his CIO and CISO to be able to support a remote workforce. Because it would be more economical. And the CIO said, no, it'll take us at least 2 years to make it be secure. And then COVID comes. And in 1 week, the entire workforce is remote. And the CEO said, I don't know whether to be happy or terrified. He's happy because he's wanted this for a long time and it was always going to take 2 years to do. And they got it done in a week. But he's terrified because he knows it's not as secure as it needs to be.
What do you say, Michael? I mean, companies today, do you think that they are at risk already? Maybe they've already been compromised without knowing it, or how big a threat is this actually?
Of course, it is a big threat, and also it comes back to planning. Like certain companies I have a knowledge of has already plans, continuity plans like this. That, an example, if your head office for whatever reason are not able to work from, then you have contingency planning. I think there's a lot, just as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of companies who actually had to start working, actually had to work at the same time when they were planning. And just as Tom mentioned, sometimes it goes very well, and other times it might be just a quick fix solution. And the important thing is, of course, that you also keep in mind that quick fix solutions might work for the first week or two, but should never become a permanent solution. You should also put in the effort and the resources actually to make it from a kind of work now solution to a more permanent and secure solution.
And I mean, for startups now and enterprises that are all part of this new normal, they are working remotely. What is actually the risk they're facing? What could actually happen if they don't take additional measures to protect themselves?
I think it's probably a different calculus for startups. On the one hand, they may not be well enough known to be attacked. And so they, maybe are a little bit lower risk. On the other, if they are attacked in a way that is exposed, it can kill their business before they get started. And they're just trying to prove themselves as reliable vendors, and particularly depends on the space they're in. If they're in financial services or medical or e-commerce and they get hacked, it could kill the company just reputationally before they get started. So it's a different kind of situation, I think, being a startup. Also, startups can have limited funding, which makes it even harder still to put all the defenses in place that they need.
What do you say, Michael? Any additional thoughts?
Yes, indeed. Two things. Beside my normal day job, I run one of the global honeypot networks, and a honeypot is just basically like a fake system, only put up with the attention to lure attackers in. And since COVID started, I could see, which is not a big surprise, but a significant increase in attacks on remote systems, something like VPN systems, remote desktop systems, and very often a small company, because you just have a small scale of workforce, remote is everything. So I know a lot of small companies that say, yeah, but I can sit here from my living room and remote into our systems. But those systems have already been at risk, but I think they're probably even more at risk with the new situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we're seeing year over year, the number of malicious login attempts has doubled. The malicious application layer attacks, up 50%. But the area that has really exploded is in malware that is trying to be placed onto employee devices. Because if it gets on the employee device, then the employee authenticates themselves, gets into the network, the private network of the enterprise, where it spreads and does a ton of damage. And literally, we saw that increase by a factor of 5 from March to May. And we can tell this because at Akamai, we do the resolutions in recursive DNS for a lot of the world's enterprises, and actually for most people, because we provide that service to most of the world's major carriers. And so we see when people are clicking on or trying to access a site that we know has malware. And of course, we block that, but the number of times where an enterprise employee, clicked on something or tried to go to a site that we know has malware increased by a factor of 5 in just 2 months during the pandemic, which is extraordinary.
It is. And I mean, if an employee just needs to click on one link and it creates such a big problem, what can you actually do to protect yourself? It seems like it's a really hard question to solve.
It is, and that's why there's so many data breaches. But you need to, I think, to change the model. And this is true, it was true before the pandemic came. It's just even more important now. And shift to a model of zero trust, where you don't give employees unfettered access at the network layer once they authenticate themselves. Because it's just too easy to get malware on their device today. And they would authenticate themselves and then get into the network, and now the malware spreads because it's inside. And instead, you need to adopt a different, newer approach to enterprise security, which is based on zero trust. And that means you don't entrust the employee device, even though the employee has authenticated themselves. And you authenticate at the application layer, but you don't let that device have direct access to the application. All the communication inside the enterprise needs to be scrubbed and looked at for spreading of malware and other malicious activity, just as if it was an external entity. In today's world, a commerce site wouldn't think about giving direct access to the consumers to their website without an application firewall. And yet we do that in many enterprises. So you gotta put the same standards in place of zero trust in your enterprise network that you would for a public network.
What do you say, Michael? Is there anything else you need to think about to actually protect your startup from, or in your enterprise?
Yeah, I think that level of risk comes even if you're a startup or even a well-established big corporation, is that you probably also need to update some of your rules and policies. Like an example, very often you said, well, if I know for a fact a lot of companies have said, listen, if you're getting an email from the CFO asking you to wire money, there's a special place you need to call, because that normally would just, I know you don't pop into the CFO's office very often, but at least this is some of the things you should be more careful about. You should also be careful, especially in some various part of the world, where you said, well, if you work from home, working from home is okay to do it in a coffee shop. Well, if you do that, you definitely need to have additional secure measures like, privacy screen and a lot of different things. So also actually clarified for the employees, like working from home don't mean at the local Starbucks coffee shop. So clarification and of course that also gives some positive awareness, like it's okay to go to Starbucks or wherever, drink your coffee, but please don't bring your corporate device.
But I mean, I imagine that many people now, as they are working remotely, that they might get tired of sitting at home. They might have kids at home. It makes it difficult to focus. So I'm imagining a lot of employees are actually sitting at these coffee shops and different smaller co-working spaces and so on. Yeah. Are they, is it already like everything is at risk then and there's nothing you can do? Or is there some way to make it okay for employees to sit at different places outside the home and work?
Our course says, don't worry, the sun will go up and rise again tomorrow. Just as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of things you as a corporation and also even as a small startup company can do. Like, the basic security rules. Don't give people local admin access on their computers, ensure that you have different accounts for one where you do your work. And if you're working in an example IT organization like a security admin, you do have different different accounts. Use two-factor authentication, and last but not least, good common sense.
Could you actually say that because of COVID and this whole situation we are in right now, that companies have become more aware of the importance of cybersecurity?
I think they're becoming more aware. They know they're behind. They knew they were behind before COVID because of all the issues we were having, but it's gotten a lot worse. It's just, I think a lot of IT departments are pretty overwhelmed right now. This has been such a large disruption. It happened so quickly and without warning. And it's distracting. I mean, everybody's personal lives have been turned upside down at the same time. So I think they're aware. It's just a real challenge to catch up.
And is it, I mean, because I'm imagining for a startup or for a smaller enterprise that it can actually be quite costly to go in and purchase different types of cybersecurity measures to secure one's business and company. Why should a company prioritize these things over other types of solutions?
Well, I think there's a range of defenses. In terms of their capabilities of what they protect you from, and in terms of their cost. And obviously a small startup is not going to be able to afford or really probably need the same level of defenses as a global financial institution. And so I think it's up to each company to sort of select the appropriate level of security for their business and profile and risk, and also their budget.
And what do you say, Michael? I know you were talking about the honeypots and what you're doing there. Is that a way for companies to become more aware of the types of attacks that might be facing their businesses?
Exactly. That's like one of the things I do is also like create awareness in that matter, because very often, especially it's not necessarily startup, but larger companies said, well, what is actually the risk? And any good solid CFO, CEO need actually to have some evidence, need to have some numbers, because you don't want just to protect yourself. Like if just 50% of your budget works on solutions, you definitely need to know where are we going to put our money. So that's like one of the showcases I have and said, okay, the reason why you should protect your remote desktop solutions, if you have some, there's a good reason for that, because you can see this is how the trends work, this is like how the attack works. And then last but not least, you're very right that can a security company, can a small startup company, can they afford to do it? I would rather the version said, can you as a small company or even a large company, can you afford not to allocate a certain amount of your budget in order to protect yourself? Of course, you need to do that, because otherwise, worst case scenario, if you're having a ransomware attack or even worse, data exfiltration, that might ruin your business, just as Tom mentioned, even before you actually get off the ground. So it's definitely something you should allocate.
You were talking about awareness, and I think that also end consumers, smaller businesses, medium-sized enterprises are becoming more and more aware of the importance of cybersecurity. And so I guess that in a way you could even see taking advantage of cybersecurity measures could actually become a competitive advantage for startups as well.
Yeah, I think that is true really across the board. To be able to trust a company with sensitive data or your bank account or your business is really, really important, and it is a competitive advantage.
And what do you say, Michael?
I said the very same thing. Actually, you can actually, rather than seeing security as a cost center, you can actually turn it into a competitive advantage. In example, there's a large hacker conference, not this year, but otherwise normally in Vegas, where a very well-known car manufacturing, Tesla, came in and said, listen, this is our brand model. try to hack it. If you actually can hack it and you can do what's called responsible disclosure, meaning that you tell, okay, I found XYZ, you should probably fix that. If you did it and you was the best person, you would actually have another Tesla as pricing. And just imagine like you had 40,000 people who comes home and said, I actually had the opportunity to test it at Tesla. On Tesla's part, it's a really good business case because you got like all the brain trust across the world, and they just have to give out some t-shirts and other stuff because people would do it just because they're passionate about it. So you actually can convert it into a competitive advantage, and you should try to do that as well.
Definitely. And I mean, to make more startups aware of this and to make them prioritize, I mean, we've talked about the risks of not prioritizing cybersecurity, but what do you think needs to happen for more startups to actually take the initiative and to start taking different types of cybersecurity precautions?
It's hard. You know, startups have a lot on their mind, you know, and just tremendous demands on their time. And they may be facing, you know, problems that they think are even worse, as opposed to the threat of something happening. Something dangerous is happening to them in their business as they try to get started. So it is hard. And it probably has to come from the top, you know, the founder or the CEO of the startup, you know, has to, as Mikael said, put aside some of the budget and some of the time and the resources for basic levels of protection.
Any additional thoughts there, Mikael? What do you think needs to happen? How do we get startups to protect themselves?
First of all, as a startup, you need to understand you might be at risk, but you also need to be very realistic about the risk model. As a startup, you might not be in the same league as a global bank. One way I have seen very often works really good is that you signed up and work together with young people at the university. Like you reach out and said, listen, I would give you access, try to hack our company. You would have like the certain permissions and NDAs in place. And then you just have a bunch of really young talent and very, very motivated people in order to try to test it out. And the best thing is that the student gets real life experience in this kind of area, and the company get a lot of really valuable insights about what kind of exposures might we have, what kind of vulnerabilities might we have, and even better, how can we actually fix it? So it's a win-win situation for everyone.
That's great. And I mean, if you now are a startup and you're starting to think about taking these precautions and to invest more time and money into different kind of cybersecurity features, what's the first step you should take to start protecting yourself?
But I think find out, you know, from the experts, what's happening out there and what kinds of defenses you need. You know, and that would include denial of service attacks, depending on your business and your web presence, application layer attacks, account takeover attacks. If your business has, you know, consumers with accounts, like a bank or a commerce company or a gaming company, there's, you know, a lot of bot armies out there that are designed to try out credentials that have been stolen elsewhere to see if they work there. And so there's defenses for that. The latest kinds of attacks, you know, like MageCart with, you know, page integrity attacks, form jacking, very widespread now. And now there's defenses on the marketplace for that. You know, these are the kinds of things that, you know, Akamai does, is provide a complete, you know, suite of defenses, including now zero trust for the internal applications and data. And so I think the first step is reaching out, learning what's happening out there, and then trying to find the right level of security defenses in your situation.
What do you say, Mikael? Any first steps?
Yeah, as a keyword would be like what's the appropriate level of security for the company, either if a startup or not. And then last but not least, also see where do I actually make my money and what kind of impact would it have? In example, if you have a web shop, of course, availability on your web page is, you know, paramount. So that's very important. However, if you do something like you are having a coffee shop, then it might be the risk of getting credit cards stolen and so. So always assess where do you actually earn your money and what kind of attacks could possible go to me. And then again, reach out to universities. There's a lot of students like second year, last year grad who would love to do risk assessment, who would love to come in just basically, just for a greeting and a cup of coffee and just be able to say, listen, for XYZ company, I actually did a risk assessment. It's very, again, engaging universities and the community, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, and I'm thinking because we are now in a global context, when we're working remotely, we can work with people from all over the world. Are the amount of attacks different depending on where in the world you are? Or are some regions more at risk than others?
I think it's totally global right now. Now there's some, and even industries like it used to be, obviously banks, because it's where the money is, right? And then commerce accounts. But we see even now in media accounts, your OTT accounts being stolen, gaming accounts being attacked on a wide scale because you've amassed, certain toys or weapons that have actually a financial value, out in the real world. People buy and sell those things. So it's really, I would say, across the board now. It's a global, cross-vertical problem.
Definitely. And okay, and now let's imagine that the new normal is remote work, and we'll imagine that remote work will continue to be something that's very common. I asked in the beginning how ready we are as a society for this, and that was in the short term, I guess, but now long term, thinking that this might be the way we always work together. Right now, I mean, we're sitting in Sweden, Denmark, and the US speaking with each other. And so I'm guessing this kind of setup will become even more common going forward. But do you think now going forward that we'll continue to see more types of attacks, or will this slow down, or is it more urgent than ever to actually start taking these precautions if you haven't already?
Yeah, my experience, the attacks never slow down. And, the prize is just too big. You have nation states that have strong political or military, industrial agendas. You have organized crime, very strong financial objective. You have political hacktivism. So you have tremendously powerful forces on the attack side, and they're creative. And it's a lot easier to attack than it is to defend. So I think we'll see it continue to increase. I think remote work is here to stay, at least in the sectors where you can do it. Manufacturing, probably harder, but certainly in tech, I think you'll see the majority of tech companies, maybe the majority of their employees working remotely, going forward. We're certainly seeing that at our company, where pretty much everybody was going to the office. And I think in the future, the likelihood is that most of our employees will be mostly working at home forever at this point. And so we're going to have to everybody's going to have to figure out the security to be able to support that.
Definitely. I'm thinking to round this talk off, because we're running out of time. Mikael, if you want to start, do you have any last piece of advice you want to leave the audience with?
Definitely. Again, assess your company's profile and the associated risk for it. Ensure that you actually have backup plans and contingency plans. And last but not least, also accept that the quick fix solution put up yesterday might not be the solution you want to go on in all alternative, and allocate budget and allocate management attention in order to get such things fixed, because it's very often that, but it works now, so we just go out and do whatever else we have to do on the agenda. So prioritize this in order, because that it is the new it is the new normal, and of course we also need to act like that.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And Tom, do you have any last piece of advice?
I think Michael's on a good point. Of course, we all want the pandemic to end. We all want to be able to go do the things we were doing before. But a lot of the changes that have taken place likely are here to stay. a lot more business across all sectors of human life is going to be online. There will be a lot more remote work. And so we should be preparing for that. This is not just going to revert back the way it was before. And so it is important to, assess where you are in your cybersecurity posture and make the necessary changes and, augmentations to your defenses. It's very important to do.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you so much, Mikael, for taking the time and sharing your insights, thoughts, and advice on this very important subject. And thank you also to everyone that took the time to listen to our talk. I hope that you will have some more knowledge now of the importance of cybersecurity and that you will be able to start taking new and more precautions to protect yourselves and your businesses already tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening.